Welcome to Middle Fingers Up. I am your host, Kieran, and this is one of those It's Good to Gup Shup. So today it's just you and I. I had a couple things on my mind, and I thought we could have a little chat about it, see what you think. So the thing I've been thinking about a lot lately as a mom raising boys, and honestly, I think this came up after a conversation with my teenage son recently. And it wasn't like a huge dramatic moment. Nobody actually stormed off. Nobody wrote a breakup album about it. Not this one, at least. Stay tuned for other parenting hacks. But no, really, like my older son, he's coming up to like 15. He challenged me on something. And while we were talking, I remember thinking, good. Not because I enjoy being challenged by a teenager. Actually, I don't mind it as much. It's probably my least favorite time to be challenged is by a teenager. I do like peace though, and I like snacks, and I like people agreeing with me. So I'm not enjoying these disagreements, but I was really happy when this happened. And I think it's because I've been really intentional about wanting my sons to know they can disagree with me safely. And I think this matters because so many boys grow up having to avoid conflict instead of knowing how to work through it or navigate it. And I think particularly in our community, the South Asian community or a lot of BIPOC communities, boys are deeply loved, like deep, like capital DEEPLY, deeply loved, right? They're protected. They're sacred. They're babied until they're like 47 and somebody's husband. But sometimes in all that love and weirdness and how boys are treated, I think what ends up happening, in all honesty, is that we accidentally teach them, keep peace, don't upset your mom, don't challenge authority, and don't create tension. And I think then later we're confused when they struggle with communication, emotional honesty, boundaries, or difficult conversations in adulthood. Like, sir, when exactly were you supposed to learn that skill? Because if a boy grows up feeling like disagreement equals disrespect, I think he often becomes a man who either shuts down, avoids conflict, people pleases, or says absolutely nothing until he randomly explodes over dishwasher placement or finances, or he's had some substances. Alcohol, drugs, other things invite the quote unquote emotional talk. And I think as moms, especially in our culture, this conversation is important. And look, this isn't a mom's responsibility. There are two people that made this child, and both those people have a responsibility. But if you've noticed in our community, dads are like absent. They're not present in the way they could be with their boys, not all dads. And so being the mom here, I feel like, fine, we'll talk mom to mom, but I'm grateful that I have a husband who has a presence and does this sort of conversing with the boys as well. It's just, I noticed this weird dynamic between mums and boys. So, and I think as mums, especially in the South Asian culture, because that's all I really know, this conversation is important. Not from a place of blame, mostly from a place of awareness, something that we can do intentionally. Because I don't want to raise sons who are only quote unquote good boys, soldiers, followers, conflict avoiders, and then later get a call from my daughter-in-law in the future who's like, what did you do with your son? I want to raise emotionally aware men. So men who can communicate honestly, sit in discomfort, advocate for themselves, apologize, express emotion outside of anger, and have hard ass conversations without acting like they've been deployed to war. And I think all of that list, we want that to happen without the use of substances. And I don't think emotional intelligence like magically appears at 28 after one podcast episode and a friggin' breakup. I think it starts at home, and I think it starts well before we even realize it. Because even when boys are little tiny little cutie pies, we often reward them for being easy. So good boy, don't argue, be nice, listen properly. There's often disciplinary activities we put them in that teach them a lot about structure and consistency and how to play like a man, which I think can easily be taught all the time, no matter what, because that's always available to men in this world we live in. I think we miss out on that emotional intelligence piece a lot of the time. And obviously, structure matters, boundaries really truly matter. I'm not raising wild raccoons here, so let's get that clear. But sometimes I think the underlying message becomes being loved equals being compliant or being silent. And then as they get older, it turns into don't talk back, don't be disrespectful, and the famous because I said so. And slowly, a lot of boys learn speaking up creates tension, disagreement disappoints people, and conflict threatens connection. I think that particular connection piece, it's like a reward system. It's not unconditional. And so this becomes a dynamic going from a boy to a man. So by the time they're teenagers, many boys don't actually have practice with emotional communication. They've practiced avoidance. And honestly, I think a lot of adults are still doing this too. So you can see this in marriages, you can see this in families, you can see this in friendships, you can see this if you're in leadership or a manager at work. There is a lot of avoidance to deal with something head on. Sometimes men think they're being clear about things, and it's often that they're walking around it. They don't want to disrupt something, which is interesting because they have so much power all the time too. So there's a lot of these indirect things that will come out. And I think out of all of that, where you see that impact most is the first place in marriages and relationships. And you see a lot of conflict between daughter-in-laws and mother-in-laws. You see a lot of conflict and struggle when should he marry, the wife comes into the family, and how she has to adjust to that ecosystem that's built around him. And it shouldn't have to be that way. Women should not have to enter families in that kind of space, especially since their partner, their husband, doesn't have to do the same when he's entering the wife's space. So I think people who avoid these kind of conversations, like I said, marriages, friendships, all that, it's like you see this happens. You avoid for 6 months to however long, and then suddenly you're sending this long ass paragraph at 1:12 a.m. because you can't get it off your chest. And I think we don't want to, I don't want to raise boys that have to let it get to a place where now the balloon pops and it's going to come out. I think this is where I had to really reflect on the kind of relationship I want as a mother, as a woman with my sons. Because I actually want them to challenge ideas. I want them to think critically. I want them to respectfully disagree. I want them to learn how to hold their own voice without fearing emotional distance. I want them to truly understand what consent means. And that's a huge part of all of that. That's really important to me. And I think sometimes as parents, especially if we are raised around guilt, hierarchy, obedience, emotional shutdown, disagreement can feel personal. So it's like, oh, so now I'm the bad guy. Oh, wow. Okay. Apparently I'm a terrible mother. We've all been in these dynamics. We've all heard this. We've been part of this. So meanwhile, your kid is literally just trying to say, I don't think that's fair. This is my belief. This is my experience. And parents center themselves in their child's experience. And those, I think, are very different things. Very different things. So one thing I've been trying to do more intentionally is replacing control with curiosity. Instead of immediately shutting something down, I'll ask, okay, tell me more about why you think that is. Where is that coming from for you? What's your perspective here? Tell me or help me understand what part of this feels frustrating or where the injustice is for you. What do you hope the outcome looks like? What are you looking for from me? What would happen if we don't come to an agreement? How will that be? Because I want my boys to know your voice does not disappear in the house just because we disagree. It matters. And from a clinical mental health side, I think this would fall under emotional regulation, secure attachment, and differentiation. So basically the ability to stay emotionally connected to someone while still being your own person. That's a lot. And I think that's a change for a lot of us that are children of immigrants, those of us that grew up in households where that wasn't understood. And so we fall into these same roles and dynamics that we grew up with. And you hear a lot of people today trying to break that because it's not we all turned out fine in every single way. There are dynamic issues, and these also disrupt us in our own relationships, and certainly when we are parenting our kids. So I also think we need to separate respect from silence. Quiet child is not automatically an emotionally healthy child. Sometimes they're just scared of the reaction. And well, I think a lot of us know that feeling, especially as kiddos of immigrants, where so many of us learned to read the room before we even learned ourselves. So now with my own kids, I'm trying to teach, okay, look, you can disagree disrespectfully, you can disagree respectfully, you can express frustration safely, you can have boundaries without guilt. That's a huge one. And you can tell the truth without fearing rejection. Like the love is not unconditional. That's funny. The love is not conditional. It's unconditional. So that's our platform. That's our foundation. That's never going to go away. We're just building character as our relationship, strengthens as you guys get older, and I guess as I get older too. Ooh, that's happening as well. Because as I just made that list, I also want to say conflict itself isn't unhealthy. And so we don't need to avoid it. I think the avoiding part is the unhealthy part. And I think we need to start to lean into that, have these conversations and move forward. It doesn't have to be blow-ups. It doesn't have to be these dramatic door slamming moments. Like we can agree to disagree. Sometimes I think we're taught that someone has to be right and it's got to be the adult and someone always knows best. But we're living two different versions here. And I think we have to respect that when we're raising kids. They're not living in the same version or the same path, the same way that we are. And so just like we're entitled to our perspectives, our opinions, our experiences, okay, our kids have to be allowed all of that as well. And I think if you look at things maybe from a clinical way, that would connect to conflict tolerance and shame. So resilience, right, is important here. Teaching kids that disagreement doesn't automatically lead to disconnection, punishment, or emotional withdrawal. I'm not going to silence you. I'm not going to pout because you spoke to me this way or you use certain kind of words towards me. It's where are we landing? Where are you coming from? And as a parent, it's my job to read between the lines of like what is actually going on here, not stopping at how dare you talk to me this way. And so I think another thing I've really been thinking about in this parenting journey is how we help boys develop critical thinking instead of just obedience. So like instead of because I said so, sometimes it's important to ask, what do you think would happen if you made that choice? This is important for moral reasoning, for them to understand what are my potential outcomes, where am I coming from? What's going to happen? What's the end game here? What's making you feel strongly about this is a good one. What do you think is fair here? I use that one a lot because I'm always curious and I haven't always gotten to where I want to be yet. Sometimes that helps me land with where I want to be by the end of this conversation. And another really good one is like part of like narrative therapy. Folks use this. So it's externalizing the problem. So taking the person outside of it and looking at it from a different way. So if your friend did this, what advice would you give them? So sometimes talking in that way helps take the intimacy of the moment out and it doesn't feel like it's you against me. So I think questions like this ultimately builds reflection and reasoning, emotional language that when they grow up, they can later utilize as a skill with their partners. It's not just compliance, it's responsibility and accountability to and for yourself. And honestly, I think boys need that because patriarchy harms boys too. Not in the same way it harms us women, but in the ways it disconnects boys from emotion, vulnerability, communication, and self-awareness. And I always say self-awareness is like a superpower. If you have that and you continue building that, that helps you step into every situation that you can possibly dream of. A lot of men were never and are never taught how to stay emotionally present during conflict. They were taught, like I keep using this word, but it's true, avoid, shut down, detach, stay quiet, don't cry, don't talk about feelings unless it's friggin' hockey or a protein intake. And then we expect emotional intimacy from them later without ever teaching the skill. And I think it's not up to whoever as adults ends up in relationships with this man. That's not the partner's responsibility. And so I think this conversation matters beyond parenting as well, because when we talk about men's mental health, we often start at adulthood. And I think we have to work backwards from there. We start when men are already struggling to communicate, when they've already instilled these patterns through the neural pathways and they're hard to undo. Not that they can't be, but they are a challenge. And there has to be that superpower of self-awareness to be able to start to undo and be consistent about it. So when we start at that point, men have already started to, in some ways, get comfortable or only know isolation, already overwhelmed, and then they're already emotionally shut down. So the dynamic to talk about this with their friends or with other people in the way us women have learned to gossip healthy, to have deep conversations with each other, that doesn't exist. And I'm not saying all men, so please don't think that I'm saying this, but let's be honest, this is majority of what we see. And kudos to the dudes out there that are doing their work and their therapies and figuring their shit out. I'm so happy. However, I'm talking about how to get my kids to that place, as well as my experience around many men, whether they have been from the South Asian community or any and all of the communities, let's be honest. So when we start to address this, and as I said, they're already at this place where they're struggling as adults, I do keep thinking, where did they first learn that discomfort should stay inside? Because boys don't magically become emotionally avoidant men overnight. And a lot of them were taught early that being easy, emotionally low maintenance, or self-reliant was what made them lovable. Oh, he's so independent. Oh, he's got this, you got this, which is great. Great to have that, but there has to be more depth to that. And I think when you look at research, you can see in there that it shows that emotional restriction, avoidant coping, and extreme self reliance are connected to poor mental health outcomes in men, including depression, isolation, and there is a higher correlation to suicide risk when men have been trained early on to live out these dynamics with themselves. And I don't think this is because men don't feel deeply. I think society, misogyny, patriarchy, all of it has really done a disservice to men. And when you have a bunch of dudes running the world, and when you look at them, these grown-ups, you see a bunch of babies in huge, oversized man suits in their diapers. Like, just a bunch of littles walking around without having understanding of who and what they truly, truly need and where their emotional competence comes from. And I think many men were never taught what to do with their feelings. And I think that's huge. So when these feelings come up, they're not sure what that means and how to go ahead and process that or address that. And if you look at this from a clinical lens, I think this connects to emotional suppression, avoidant attachment patterns, and difficulties with emotional processing. So honestly, I don't think the answer is just men need to just talk more. I think we've done so much damage as society that we can't just start that way. I think boys need emotionally safe relationships very early from the start, and places where they can disagree, express frustration, ask for help, feel emotion, and stay connected without shame, because emotional safety is so preventative. Teaching boys emotional language, conflict navigation, boundaries, which is tied to consent and self-expression, isn't making them weak. It's giving them tools, and maybe part of changing men's mental health outcomes starts way before adulthood. So I think we need to work backwards from that. And maybe it starts in everyday, ordinary conversations at home, at the dinner table, in disagreements before and after, maybe even during, in whether boys feel emotionally safe telling the truth. So. For me, this conversation isn't about perfect parenting. Please, if you know me, you know I'm far from it. It's about intentional parenting. That's always my goal. That's always my aim. It's asking, am I creating a home where honesty feels safe? Am I teaching my sons that connection can survive any kind of disagreement or that icky feeling that might be happening because we're putting in a boundary? Am I raising boys who only know how to keep the peace, or boys who know how to communicate truthfully while staying connected to the people they love? Because to me, that helps those boys become very different men. And honestly, I think some of the strongest parenting happens when we stop asking, how do I make my child more obedient? And start asking, how do I help my child become emotionally whole? And I don't think a lot of us might intentionally be saying, how do I make my child more obedient? But pay attention to our actions and the things that aren't being said. That's where we can tell and see what are we striving for, but how is it actually coming out? It's possible as parents we're giving our kids mixed messages. It's possible that we think we're doing this great thing, but something else is happening here. So it's important for us to also foster that superpower of self-awareness and be okay with screwing that up and coming back to it over and over and over again. So I think that's the work for me right now when it comes to parenting my kids. And honestly, of course I want peace. Of course, I want my dishwasher emptied. and loaded properly. I still want everyone to stop eating shredded cheese directly from the bag. I'm, the same and on many levels as everyone, but I think I have to push myself a little bit more because I'm trying to help break some cycles here, and I think we can do it together. So I also want my sons to know their voices matter, even especially when that voice challenges me. So that's today's Gup Shup. Look, if you are raising kids and you're not sure and you're kind of in a similar boat as me, like reach out. Let's talk about it. I think sharing parenting strategies, I think being open to not being perfect with parenting, those kinds of things are the way to go for all of us because it's really not about us. It's about how the next generation is going to turn out. And we are far from perfect. I can at least say for myself. And so I didn't add this in here, but I would say I think it's our responsibility as parents to understand how to apologize to our kids from childhood onward because it helps them understand we don't have it all. We're not going to know it all. And at some point, they too are going to have to return those apologies to others out there. So it's important that we're practicing that. I think that's a strong part of creating a safe community. So maybe I'll get back to you when my kids grow up and they maybe get married and I get feedback, a survey from my daughter-in-law who can let me know how I did in my part of parenting. But I will go back to, again, it's not a one-person job. It took two people to create these children. And I know there's homes where both parents aren't intact. And I really, truly hope that we can be responsible as adults and keep parenting our kids intact, whether we continue to be together or not. Those kids need to see the presence and feel the presence of both parties. That is very important, but I guess not necessary either. So anyways, this was another episode of It's Good to Gup Shup. This is what's been on my mind. I really hope to hear from you guys. Thank you for being here with me.